Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Scott Fenner, and I am the Fantasy Football Plug. Today, we're going to be going over the top 12 players you want to draft next year for your fantasy football draft. That's right. I am already ready for next year's fantasy football. Gonna probably start mocking here pretty soon, but we already got our top 12. We got 1 through 12 in order. We're going to start with 12. Pick number 12. If I had the 12 pick and all the other guys were gone ahead of them, I'm going to go in descending order. All right, so we're going to go number 12, Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, I only have him at number 12. I know he was a stud this year, and I want to say possibly the number one overall, really, in a lot of formats. We're currently talking about PPR. I don't know if I mentioned that, but this is top 12 PPR players. Josh Jacobs, he does get a lot of touches, but next year, we don't know where he's going to be. We don't know who the if he does sign with Vegas because he was on a contract year this year, which is part of the reason why I think he did so well. He'll likely get paid by somebody next year and start his decline because that's what the players do. Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, the list goes on. But those were bad examples, actually, because they both did something completely a little bit different. But typically, once they do get paid, they're not as dominant. Ezekiel Elliott, there's another good one. But yeah, so I do expect Vegas to re-sign him. He will probably be a pretty good back, solid floor player. I don't see him repeating as a number one. I don't actually know if he finished number one, but he was number one for most of the year, so I assume he probably was number one at the end. But yeah, Josh Jacobs, I have him as my number 12 going in to the 2023 fantasy football season. My number 11 pick would be Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, he's a young, talented guy, plays for Seattle, super run-heavy offense. He is going to get somewhat overlooked. When people do their stuff next year, they're going to look at total season stats. They're not necessarily going to think, okay, what did Kenneth Walker do weeks 1 through 5? Not much because they didn't really use him because Rashad Penny was there and everything else, Rashad Penny injury happens, which happens every year. Kenneth Walker steps in, which is why Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny in the draft, if you remember, were going pretty darn close to each other. And Kenneth Walker was typically going just ahead of Rashad Penny. Yeah, in week 6, he started to show up. He was probably an RB1, not overall, but a top 12 running back in weeks 6 through 18. He had a couple of bad weeks in there. Most weeks he was touching the ball a lot. He even had a couple of games where I think, he gets targets. I wasn't sure if he was going to be necessarily a receiving back in the NFL, but he had a game where he had 8 targets. He got 6 of them. He had a game where he had 5 targets. He got 4 of them. That shows me that he can be that NFL every down workhorse back. And a workhorse back in a Seattle offense is a player that you want on your team. So my next up, I got at my 10 spot, another running back, Joe Mixon. Obviously, most of the time you're going to have running backs and wide receivers in your first round. Maybe an occasional tight end or quarterback, but typically no. Joe Mixon, he is a high floor player. That being said, he's not my favorite. He's one of those that I'm picking that I'm like, well, I guess, I got him at my 10. I might take Kenneth Walker over him next year. Not 100% sure. But he's in a high-powered offense. They're going to get a lot. He's going to get some looks inside the 5 because they get the ball so much. And Joe Burrow also likes to air it out. And with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, they're going to get some long touchdowns, and that's not if you get a long touchdown, there's no chance for any running back to get the touchdown there. At least typically not going to be a long passing touchdown to Joe or Joe Mixon. He did have that one game. It was like some crazy huge point total, boosted his stats way up. If you take that game out of there, he is closer to probably the 10th, 12th back, not closer to the 4 or 5. But solid floor player. He'll get his touches. He'll get some touchdowns. He's not the feature guy on that offense anymore. So, but he is a running back that will get a lot of touches, and he catches the ball enough to keep him, a decent floor. My number 9 guy, our first wide receiver, but really it's going descending. So our first wide receiver that we're coming to is the number 9 pick, Stefon Diggs. I like Stefon Diggs a lot. He was the number 1 wide receiver for much of the year, not most, but much of the year. Cooper Kupp was kind of there at the beginning, then he got hurt, and then Tyreek Hill was there a little bit, but it was like Tyreek Hill and Diggs flirt with that spot, and then all of a sudden Justin Jefferson went on a run at the end. But Diggs he's on a super high powered offense, which is probably, it's like them and KC are probably the 2 most high powered offenses. But the difference between them and KC is, at least for now, KC, like Travis Kelce does get more than everybody else does, but like Diggs gets, like, it's Diggs, Gabe Davis, little bit of Dawson Knox, little bit of the running backs, but like it's the running game for Josh Allen and aired out to Gabe Davis and Diggs. A little bit of Isaiah McKenzie, he's not a Patrick Mahomes. I'm gonna get each of my 14 guys catching the ball 3 catches each. Diggs is gonna probably have 15 targets and catch 12 of them. So, and it seems like he had a chip on his shoulder to me when he left Minnesota. When they went after Justin Jefferson, replaced him, kind of thought Thielen was gonna be the guy over, I think, even Justin Jefferson, at least for a little bit. But Justin came straight out of the gate being awesome, which is why he's where he's at. But yeah, he's playing great. Number 8, we're going to stick with wide receivers here. We got Tyreek Hill, the Cheetah. He is just so freaking fast. That man makes everybody else look like they're walking, literally. He is on a whole nother level. There are a couple of guys, I think, that are technically higher, like miles per hour in the game at one point in time, but like tenths of a mile per hour. But yeah, he's up there. He's a freak when it comes to his speed. That's why they call him Tyreek the Freak. Yeah, and he would probably be higher up on this list if Tua's concussion health, future, all that stuff. I think Tua's gonna play. Don't get me wrong, but Tyreek Hill does have a slight question mark above his head, because if it's like Skylar Thompson or just somebody that's not a pretty, capable quarterback, at least to get it far enough to where he can outrun the people, he just needs not a bottom end quarterback. But yeah, Tyreek Hill is awesome. He's my number 8. Number 7, Derrick Henry. I mean, he's a tank. Dude's huge. He's like 500 billion pounds and runs like a 1.4. A 1.4 40 and 500 pounds. You wanna go tackle that? No, neither do NFL defenses. Which is why the Derrick Henry approach works. He might get you a couple yards. He can touch the ball 30 freaking times. And he's starting to catch the ball now. Like, Derrick Henry catching the ball, he's not like CMC at catching the ball, but like they've been saying they're gonna bring Derrick Henry's passing game more into it, and this year they kind of did. So he is my number 7. I do drop him out of my top 12. if for any reason Tannehill's not there in the future. Travis Kelce is my number 6. Now I know I said typically quarterbacks and tight ends aren't going to go on this list, and quarterbacks are not, but Travis Kelce is such a difference maker at his position. And in fantasy's about plus minus. So like everybody, unless you're in a league that doesn't play a guaranteed tight end for like everybody in the league hasn't played a tight end, then he's not as strong of a player, I'd say. But in leagues where, especially if you have like 12 teams and every team needs to start one tight end at least, or one tight end every week, it's like he is such a difference maker. Between him and like the number 12 guy, between him and the number 2 guy is like such a vast difference that no other position has a player of that plus minus caliber that he does. He brings a difference. And I would have him as my number 1 overall, but the dude's 33, about to be 34 next season. And every year we're saying, is this the year he's going to drop out? Is this the year he's going to drop out? You know, I have him at my number 6 only because, not number 1, because he's going to be 34. And Kadarius Toney's there too, so it's another little sneaky guy right there. He might be pretty good next year. But yeah, Travis Kelce has been doing it for so long. He's actually, this is his 7th year straight with 1,000+ receiving yards. Just insane. We're going to move on. Number 5, Saquon Barkley. He's a touch monster. He can do everything. He can catch the ball. He can run the ball. He can play quarterback. I mean, Daniel Jones, backup, I don't remember who the backup is for the Giants, but both of them went out in the same game. Saquon finished the game as the quarterback. I don't think he might have thrown the ball once, but like typically he's a wildcat quarterback. Like if he becomes a quarterback in the game, they're just gonna run to Saquon, or have him maybe hand it off on a reverse or something. But yeah, the Giants are getting better, so better team, more scoring opportunities, more touchdown opportunities, better fantasy outcome. So he didn't have a ton of touchdowns this year. He still finished very, very well. He didn't do bad on the touchdown. I don't know exactly how many he had, maybe 8, 10 touchdowns this year. But he could definitely, he's a contender for next year's number 1 overall running back. And we're going to move on to number 4. It's going to be Cooper Kupp. Now, you might be saying, you know, Cooper Kupp had a serious injury, and you know you need to watch out with that, because the best predictor of injury is past injury, or future injury is past injury. So, you know, although he is a risk, when he's healthy, he is such an advantage. He is that Travis Kelce. He's the Josh Allen, or you know, Mahomes of his position. He makes it so he's almost 2 positions in the same player. I mean, it's not like he was CMC from the 1 year where he's actually running the ball a ton and catching the ball a ton. But in terms of points per game, he's giving you at least 2 flexes plus a game as your wide receiver 1. That gives you a huge advantage over your competition, and really all you need to do is have him stay healthy. Because really the only thing knocking Cooper Kupp is his age and the injury. But I believe in him. If Stafford comes back, this is okay, so I expect him to. But let's say Stafford doesn't come back. If Stafford doesn't come back, I don't think will get enough targets to be drafted this highly. He will still be good, but I don't think you'll be happy with it if you end up taking him with a top 4 pick, even a top 12 pick. But if he has Stafford loves to pick one guy. I mean, I've been in Detroit area for a long time. Stafford, he'll pick one guy and not even care about their health, not care anything about that person. Just let me get my own stats. So whoever's the guy that I think has a strong enough motor, I could just throw them the ball regardless of their health and outcome. You know, there was one game, I'm going a little off topic here, but Calvin Johnson is going out. He's triple teamed. Stafford sees Calvin. Now, I get it. Calvin Johnson is awesome, and he could probably catch anything. And if it's a different scenario, sorry, Calvin, you might have to take a hit, bud. But, like, I want to say they were down like 3-4 touchdowns to New Orleans late in the game. And Stafford throws the ball up, and Calvin comes down with it, and instead of going for the ball at all, the defenders just like all body slammed him at the same time and just slammed him to the ground. All the other Lions players noticed, oh, our star player Calvin Johnson's hurt. We got to go make sure our guy's good. Let's go make sure our guy's good. So they're all running around Calvin and trying to make sure he's good. Stafford's running around like an idiot with his head down and his finger up like, we're number one. No, bro. You play for the Lions. Now you don't even play for the Lions are good now. You left and then they got good. So you ain't it. But you like to pick your one guy, and you can help a fantasy team because you will pick that one guy, and to the detriment of yourself, your own team, your buddy on the field, don't matter. You will kill him. You will hurt him in order to better your own stats. You're a 5,000 yard guy, buddy. Good job, Maddie. Good job, John. So sorry I went off on a little bit of rant there. I'm just glad we got Stafford out of town. I'm also, a little bit of a Detroit fan, so get that boy out of town. My number 3 pick, Justin Jefferson. He could go number 1 overall again. I could see it, especially in a PPR setting, because he's breaking records like every year. He just keeps coming out, doing it. And Kirk Cousins seems to want to get him the ball. I don't see many people in that offense going anywhere. If anything, the offense probably gets a little bit better. I don't think Jalen Reagor's a huge asset, but I do think he helps them in a little bit more depth. I like KJ Osborne a little bit better than him, but does help him in that little bit of depth if any injuries happen. If Kirk Cousins ever decides to spread the ball around a little bit more. But I think Kirk Cousins actually probably will need to try to spread the ball around a little bit more, just so Justin Jefferson's health doesn't deteriorate like a Stafford receiver would, or I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah. Let's see. Justin Jefferson, he's breaking records. He can beat double teams. He's not... I do think there's a lot of receivers in history that have been better than him. I think he's possibly on his way to being the best, at least statistically. But I would take a handful of receivers over him in their prime versus what I saw last year. It also doesn't help the little bit of negative attitude I have from him catching 1 for 15 in my fantasy finals. But it's neither here nor there. So he is my number 3 pick. My number 2 pick and number 1 pick are both going to be running backs because this is fantasy football, and that is the position that you need and you want because it is not deep. So my number 2 pick, Austin Eckler. He's a PPR monster, just a monster. And like even going into this year, I had some reservations about him. I wasn't 100% sure because Josh Kelly, he still scares me. Josh Kelly still scares me. There are other pieces around the running game in the Chargers and the fact that they don't necessarily love to run him inside the 5 is the thing that scares me. And he hasn't always gotten his touches, but he's starting to get his touches plenty more. He's getting a ton of targets. He's probably, I'm not 100% on this, but probably the number 1 targeted running back this year. He gets targeted like crazy. Also, he's a touchdown machine. Dude scores. He had, a handful of touchdowns in his first few years, and then last year drops like 20 touchdowns, which was like, I want to say more than he scored in his entire career before that. So it's like, okay, likely touchdown regression, especially because his touch numbers weren't with where some of the other guys were at. And then boom, he does it again. And he loves fantasy. He loves fantasy. He actually pays attention, and if you have him on your team, whether he knows you or not, he actually cares what happens to your fantasy team. There's not a ton of players around the league that you can say that and somewhat think it's actually probably true. He seems like a really good guy too. I really like that in my team, even though it's not necessary. I like it because I like good people, but I also like winning championships, so not necessary. And my number 1 overall guy, he's been my number 1 for years, and he'll probably be my number 1 for years to come. That's Christian McCaffrey. He's just the best player. He's the best player per touch. He now plays for San Francisco, and he got out of Carolina. I don't know fully how that happened, but and Carolina actually looked a little bit better without him, so that's kind of crazy too, because he's like the best player, probably the NFL, regardless of position. He's so shifty. He reminds me so much of LaDainian Tomlinson in his prime. So shifty. Every single piece of his game is so good. I mean, the only thing could make it better if he was Derrick Henry's size and he could do what he's doing, but that's probably not actually literally possible. But yeah, and then now because he plays for San Francisco, they have Brandon Ayuk, they have still Deebo Samuel, they have George Kittle, they got Elijah Mitchell, they got who's their other running back? The other running back, gosh, why can't I remember now? Either way, they have a ton of weapons there, and they are probably either going to have another year of a little bit better Trey Lance, if he's good enough, or because of how that team's built, that team will go after a real quarterback. Aaron Rodgers might end up in San Francisco next year. One of these guys, one of these quarterbacks that's a real quarterback that needs a new home could end up going over to San Francisco, because if they had a quarterback, they are winning 1,000,000 Super Bowls and then some. Like, this team, defensively, offensively, all around, special teams, you freaking name it, they can do it. Yeah, that was my top 12, super way too early, top 12 fantasy players for the 2023 fantasy football season. I am Scott Fenner. I'm signing out.